Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Teona Sekhniashvili. I am Europe Network and Press Freedom Coordinator at International Press Institute, which is a global media freedom organization based in Vienna, Austria. And this is a webinar which is hosted by Media Freedom Rapid Response. Media Freedom Rapid Response is a coalition of media freedom organizations, which include International Press Institute, the European Federation of Journalists, Article 19 Europe, Osservatorio Balcani Caucaso tras Europa, Free Press Unlimited, and it's led by European Center for Press and Media Freedom. So the main objective of Media Freedom Rapid Response is to promote journalist rights and press freedom across European Union member states and candidate countries. And it's a Europe-wide mechanism which tracks, monitors, and reacts on press freedom violations across the continent. You can see on the Media Freedom Rapid Response website what our extensive range of activities are. You can find the website linked in the chat below. So today we are shining a spotlight on Georgia, the government of which the Georgian Dream ruling party reintroduced the foreign agent law under the title Transparency of Foreign Influence earlier this month. I say reintroduced because the very similar, in fact, the same legislation was proposed last year as well. However, the government was in fact forced to withdraw this legislation as a result of widespread, massive protests, but also international criticism. This year as well, the law was followed by massive street protests that have continued in the streets of Tbilisi for weeks now, and we have also seen very rigorous international criticism. You can find, by the way, Media Freedom Rapid Response statement on the matter also in the chat. So the only difference, I think it should be noted that the only difference between the legislation from last year and this year is that media freedom organizations and press organizations, newsrooms, and NGOs this year will have to register again, but not as foreign agents like last year, but as organizations pursuing interests of foreign power. There is a lot of criticism, as I said, and also we have witnessed that Georgian independent media has shown a lot of solidarity. But also we will delve into foreign agent law and how the media and civil society reacted. But we will discuss and examine the broader press freedom state in the country. Many argue that the decline and erosion of press freedom in Georgia is becoming more and more acutely visible. Just after the reintroduction of the foreign agent, so-called, I would say, Russia-style foreign agent law, independent media from online outlets, journalists from online outlets have been barred from the parliament. So that renders them, in fact, unable to cover and report on the debate over this legislation. But we have also seen increased violence against the journalists. On April 16, on one of those massive demonstrations against the foreign agent law, 3 journalists from Georgian outlets, including Publika, and we have an editor-in-chief of Publika today, and Lika will discuss this, I'm sure, today later, but including Publika, Aprili Media and Tabula have been attacked physically and verbally by the riot police officers. One Azerbaijani freelancer journalist was also physically attacked at this demonstration. We also have seen that since 2021, basically, there has been targeted attacks on journalists from far-right groups, but also from the government. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers today. I would like to thank them very much for joining, especially during this very difficult and busy times. Here we have Mariam Nikuradze. She is co-founder and executive director of Open Caucasus Media, or OC Media. OC Media is one of the most popular and prominent outlets that covers Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, but also Northern Caucasus region. Thank you very much, Mariam, for joining us. Then we have Lika Zakashvili. She is co-founder and editor-in-chief of Publika. Publika is a relatively, I would say, young media launched in 2019. Before Lika worked at an media also independent media outlet called the Aprili. And despite that Publika is a young outlet, I think it very quickly found the niche, the Georgian media market, and became one of the most read and popular online magazines. Thank you, Lika. And then we have also Tamar Kintsurashvili. Tamar is a CEO of Media Development Foundation. This is an NGO focusing on media literacy and promoting quality independent journalism in Georgia. I think in 2014, correct me if I'm wrong, Media Development Foundation also launched an independent fact-checking platform, one of the major fact-checking platforms in Georgia, Detector. And Tamar will speak about fact-checking and misinformation in Georgia, debunking fake news also in Georgia today. And we have Mamuka Andguladze. Mamuka is a press freedom expert and media expert with years of experience working on topics pertinent to media freedom and independence. And he is a chair of Media Advocacy Coalition. This is a coalition which unites 16 press freedom and human rights organizations and aims at promoting independent journalism in the country. So thank you again, everybody. And I would like to ask my first question to Mariam Nikuradze. And it feels great to have you here also because we had a conversation about foreign agent law around this time, actually in March last year. And I remember you told me that you would not have ever imagined that one day you would wake up and a Russia-style foreign agent law would be introduced in Georgia, because Georgia was, always regarded as a beacon of democracy and beacon of hope in the region. Yet this happened, and I also read your recent article that was nominated for a Europe Press Prize, where you write that some people still cannot believe how far Georgia has fallen and how much basically freedom of speech and freedom of expression has eroded. And I would like to ask you now to also tell us how your experience as a journalist, as a reporter who very often covers the events in front of the Georgian parliament on the main Rustaveli Avenue, have evolved over years.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I'd like to start by responding to your remark, because a few years ago, I think it was in 2019 or 2020, Russia listed us as an undesirable organization because we cover the North Caucasus and we had this Russian language, and they put us on this list as with this law. Basically, it was part of it, and that's where we were joking that it's so good that we are registered in Georgia, because nothing similar would happen here. And here we are for the second time, a year after the law was withdrawn, again facing the same danger. And obviously, also media would be one of the first media, like such organizations, to be targeted by this law, because obviously majority of our funding comes from foreign sources. Our donors are foreign donors or the embassies based in Georgia, and it would put our existence in danger. As for your second question, I think it started mostly in 2021 when things drastically changed for journalists. Obviously, there were violations and very alarming cases before that too, during the GD rule. But in 2021, it was like this one big concern became very on top of the agenda of the journalists, which is physical security, because of the 5th of July, when journalists were attacked by the violent far-right groups in the streets. And many people, including my very close friends, were injured. They had quite serious injuries, and one of them died. And since then, I'd say it just kept deteriorating further. And currently we have like this fears in several directions, which is physical threat to our work in the field. This is one. Legislative threats, obviously not only foreign agents draft law, but also like recently adopted the law on broadcasting, where they've put quite dangerous records banning broadcasters to broadcast so-called obscenity, which I think will be used especially during the election campaign. And then there are talks about this so-called LGBT law, which will also include the part about censoring media outlets. And I believe at some point we may also see the so-called defamation draft law coming soon. There were hints in the past, and this happened in other countries where we've seen Russia's influence, right? So this is another one. And the third one is basically direct pressure coming from the government people on individual media outlets or individual journalists, and this whole like hate campaign, disinformation campaign targeted against journalists, which eventually turned, it harms our image, it harms our trust. So there are so many fronts for us to be concerned about. And yeah, just not only working in the field changed for us, because I don't know, it really depends what kind of protest you're going to. Like, what is, like, one day we have to take this gas masks and helmets and press badges and so on, and the other day we just hide our identities and pretend we are some far-right activists just to feel safe. I mean, just recently, I and some of my colleagues had a new experience when we had like 4 or 5 police officers going around with us while we were covering the protest of this far-right group. This is a new development, which I don't remember ever, at least in my experience of like 15 years, the journalists need like a personal guard of the police to cover some events. And even then, I mean, it was quite difficult to navigate and cover this protest, because police officers would tell us that, okay, don't go deep into the crowd because we cannot protect you there. And okay, you are providing security. First of all, why do we need this? It is the government and the police who allowed these groups to be violent in the first place, and then never punished them, never punished the people who organized 5th of July or the people who organized the individual attacks on the TV crews and other journalists in the streets. And punishments were either really small, or the cases were shelved, especially the online threats and this like verbal abuses as well. So eventually we got to this funny quote mark situation where one day police officers like follow you inside the crowd to protect you from possible attacks, and on the other day, just last week, you just mentioned in your introduction, 3 journalists were attacked, and others were not allowed to film the police brutality on the. I mean, I tried to take some videos of people being beaten, but I was prevented too, because police officers were really angry when they saw that we were documenting what they were doing there. So yeah, it's very tough.
Okay, thank you so much for this overview, also bringing up the anti-LGBT constitutional changes idea and the law banning obscenity. I think considering also these different legislations that are proposed is also very important to assess the overall press freedom, broader press freedom state in Georgia. And I also wanted to ask you, last year you said that you would even consider to register in Armenia instead, because press freedom situation is actually much better now in Armenia. Do you have any plan Bs, provided that the law is adopted? And I know that everything is done.
Mm-hmm. We are, of course, thinking
from the independent media side.
We are thinking about plan Bs. Actually, Armenia would not work for us because we cover Armenia and Azerbaijan, and it would create huge issues with our Armenian coverage. So Azerbaijani coverage. But yeah, we are actually considering to register somewhere else outside Georgia. For this and many other reasons. Actually, we had some issues from the local banks, which refused to provide us some kind of services without giving any explanation. And on top of everything, this created this such necessity that maybe it is actually better to have this as a plan B when if there is something that may happen here, we could use that. But of course, we don't have time there is not enough time to do that. I mean, of course, we started researching and so on, but there is bureaucracy, you need to transfer everything and so on. This law may come to force in June or even at the end of the May, and obviously we will not have time to do that. But it's not just us. I know that other media outlets are also considering to take some steps but I believe that the first plan we all have is just not to obey to this law and see where it takes us. I think there is willingness in most of the independent media and agreement on this, that if the law comes to force, we are not going to register and see what's going to happen. Probably there will be fines, there will be then more fines, and at some point probably they will have the leverage to stop our operations, but maybe somehow we will reach to the election and then see how it goes. I don't know, maybe Lika could also.
Yeah, I also want to ask basically the same questions to Lika. By the way, just thank you very much, Mariam, for this. I hope we'll be able to get back to you during the Q&A. And I wanted to say that Publika has been, I said it once, but I want to outline it again. Publika has been subjected to attacks and pressure from the government, and this pressure is increasing. Last year, by the way, during the protests against the foreign agent law, Publika's executive director was one of the detained journalists, Zora Vardiashvili. And I want to ask Lika the same question, basically. What are the plans, and what do you think will be the consequences, short-term and medium-term consequences of this law, of this draft law, but just in case it's adopted, because
yeah. Thank you, Teona, for your introduction, and I want to repeat again, saying what Mariam already said, that we will not register as an entity carrying out foreign interests. If the law is enforced, our work will be paralyzed, maybe, but now we are thinking to fight and do everything against this law, and then we will see what kind of plan B will present. Yeah, just I want to say that Mariam already described very good the challenges which independent media have in Georgia. For the past few years, the authorities have been trying to limit the work of the media in various ways, whether it be through the restricting access of public information, the deliberate persecution of critical journalists and outlets, or other means. But this law, given its nature and objective, threatens to mark the end of the free media organizations. Publika has been operating for 4 years now. Our main platform is our webpage, and we distribute our content on Facebook, Instagram, covering the human rights, democracy, and some public important issues. And people share their story with us about the being persecuted and harassed by the government. We are writing about the individuals, the group of facing various forms of attacks and harassment. And we are concerned that if we are forced to register as an entity of carrying out foreign interest, people will be reluctant to share their stories of government persecutions. This is the absurd. The main goal of this bill is to damage our reputation. And the government thinks that any criticism is harmful to their reputation. Therefore, they want to silence all critical voice. And the media outlet like ours are especially treating to them because a critical thinker and people with a high civil consequences trust us due to our impartial reporting, and by attempting to eliminate us, they aim to create an information void for the civil sector and citizens who rely on fact-based information.
Thank you very much, Lika. As I understand, I think this is also a position of all independent media, virtually all independent media in Georgia, that they plan to register as foreign agents or organizations pursuing interests of foreign power.
Yes, our position is that.
Thank you so much. Moving on, I want to ask Tamar, who has worked a lot on, debunking fake news and also analyzing online harassment against journalists. What would you say constitutes the main narratives of the Georgian Dream propaganda around the discussions over the so-called foreign agent law?
Thank you, Teona. Hello, everyone. Good to join this gathering. The narratives of Georgian Dream changed since 2022 dramatically. Their messages are in line with the pro-Kremlin actors, especially when it concerns democratic institutions, because the fundamental problem when we are talking about current development is that democracy and democratic institutions are perceived as a threat for current government, and they are using all their resources to attack us, platforms and institutions that are not controlled by them. And the new legislation attempts to actually formalize this process, because when we did research in 2022, we found that the GD messages are against the Western partners, mainly US, EU, Ukraine, accusing them in dragging Georgia into the war, supporting their spies locally, saying that Western aid is tailored for foreign agent and not for the benefit of Georgian people. In addition, their message is that Western aid is for for fighting with our religious and national identity. And if you see Dugin supporters in Georgia, you can hear the similar messages. The problem right now is that the pro-Kremlin actors Mariam was mentioning, they have limited resources compared with ruling party, because not only trolls are working to distribute this message, but TV channels and the big media platforms consolidated in the hands of the ruling dominant groups, and they are using the different ministries and the public servants to serve their interests. And I think it was last year when Meta removed the number of accounts linked to Prime Minister's strategic communication units. This also proves that our research findings, because we were talking for a long time that Western support to fight Russian disinformation was used by government against the free media, against independent fact checkers. And now the Western partners acknowledging this, but unfortunately, we have outcome and we need to work in coordinated way to address fundamental problems. It's not about just toxic language towards the journalists, but also what we noted over last years, the attempt to create parallel institution and discredit independent institution. For instance, Communication Commission, which should be independent body, created the media criticism platform to resemble the media self-regulation institution like Charter of Journalistic Ethics. Or ruling party created its own fact-checking platform called In Reality, and they have more funding, more resources. They are using similar labels, but with different meaning. For instance, when three watchdog organizations like Transparency International, ISFED, Gaila released the report, midterm report on elections, they called it undemocratic campaign, which is nonsense itself, because democracy is about having critical voices rather than only voice supporting ruling party. So this is, and one thing I want to add, what Mariam said, impunity toward the far-right groups, because GD helped the pro-Kremlin far-right groups to become part of mainstream. Most people, only perpetrators were punished, but not organizers. And these organizers, they launched Altinfo Conservative Movement political party, opened offices across Georgia. And now we have elections when we have pro-Russian political party justifying violence for achieving their political goal. And at the same time, ruling party initiating gay propaganda legislation, restriction of gay propaganda legislation, and foreign agent law. So I will stop here and I'm ready to respond on
Thank you very much, Tamar. From what you're saying, it looks like the Georgian Dream is sort of, taking over the narratives of the far-right pro-Russian groups.
Yes,
yeah,
but
steadily,
this is not
slowly.
new trend, actually. If we go back in 2016, they initiated 2 constitutional amendments about the definition of marriage and restriction of sale of foreign land to foreigners. Before, it was initiative of pro-Kremlin Patriots of Alliance of Patriots, and in 2020, they detained 2 innocent civil servants. I mean, the David Gareji case, which was about the information operation claiming that previous government was selling lands to foreigners, while new one tries to return them. And this was a part of the campaign of the Alliance of Patriots, accusing Azerbaijan being occupied like Russia, shifting focus from Russian occupation to historic one. It serves Russia's interests, creating the fruitful ground for the far-right groups to claim that all our neighbors are our enemies while we have the Russian tanks on the ground. It serves their interests only. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Tamar. I think we have time for one more question. And I have seen that there has been also targeted attacks on fact checkers by the Georgian Dream officials. The Prime Minister actually himself referred to you personally and Mr. Tactor as censors. Would you also like to probably elaborate on that briefly?
Actually, both fact checkers, Mr. Tactor and Fact Check Georgia, were attacked. And ruling party are presenting the content moderation on platforms as censorship, which is misunderstanding of the tool itself. When Georgia claims to be part of European Union and newly developed Digital Act obliged platform to create content moderation, unfortunately, our Prime Minister speaks from his party perspective rather than from the perspective of protection of information environment. Unfortunately, the government affiliated to the anonymous accounts are using this democratic platform, because social networks are democratic platforms. On the one hand, allowing the people to raise their problems or criticize government, etc. We witness in this day how they are fabricating the photos from protests with homophobic content, trying to present this protest as LGBTQI pride, etc. It's abuse of the social media in favor of ruling party. And we are using our partnership with Meta to flag this content as a false and fabricated. We are following methodology developed by IFCN or European fact-checker standard networks rather than ruling party instructions how to act and how to fact-check their statements.
Thanks, Tamar. And moving on, I would like to ask Mamuka. By the way, Media Advocacy Coalition, I said that unites 16 press freedom organizations, and the Media Development Foundation is also part of it. And it joins this effort. And I want to ask Mamuka quite a generic question. We, to some extent, already touched upon some of the characteristics and tendencies of the media landscape of Georgia, but I would still like to ask you, how would you describe media market and media landscape in the country? It is sometimes described as polarized and then pluralistic, yet partisan, etc. What is your take on that?
Thank you very much, Teona. Hello everyone, and thank you for organizing this discussion webinar. First of all, I fully agree with the assessment and analysis. Even so, it was like not my colleagues and panel do not have like much time because they could speak more, even in more details. But the analysis and an assessment provided by my colleagues, I fully agree. And I would say that the general media environment in Georgia has been significantly deteriorated. And it has been displayed not only by the assessment of the local organizations who are conducting on a regular basis assessment analysis, but also according to international organizations. And this Russian law, I just want to add that among others, it is very, very problematic, but for media outlets, among others, the authorities can conduct the checking, which means that they will have getting access on anonymous hint as well, like Soviet Russian style practice. And besides that stigmatization and fines and etc., they will get all personal information. So, and according to the domestic and international standards, as long as this legislation still exists, you have to be very careful when you are dealing with media outlets, and when you get all personal information, there is no chance to ensure that you are protecting your sources. Physical violence, my colleagues also mentioned about that. If at the beginning when the Georgian Dream was in power, it was not a huge problem, today is one of the key issues, along with the not ineffective response by the state authorities. Even so, there are some challenges with regard to a specific article which specifies the responsibility for illegal interference into the journalistic activity. The existing legal framework is sufficient to ensure the protection of journalists. And as Tamar stated about the disinformation, there's an ongoing around the clock, 24 hours smear campaign, which again justifies the violence and encourages further violence. Polarization remains a huge topic in Georgian political media sector, but I would say that polarization, to some extent, it's fine, but in our case, the government is driving the polarization. Even the topics like the European Euro integration, the government right now, it's not only about civil society and media organization, it's about the geopolitical change of the Georgian strategy. And our friends, colleagues, supporters, Western countries who are supporting our independence and ensuring the institutional independence of the country, they're declaring as enemies. And this is the government tries in all topics to ensure the deepening the polarization. When we last year talked about the media environment, one of the key issues was Nikuradze, former director and founder of the leading proposition media station, who was a political prisoner. Even so, we were very happy and satisfied that the president has pardoned him. It doesn't mean the system is working properly. It was like ultima ratio, the last resort to ensure the justice for the political prisoner. Unfortunately, in Georgia, we have all indications about state capture. There are literally no agencies which are receiving the funding from the state government, are not literally depending on the and lining to the political party's main line, and as a result, there is also signs and clear signs of media capture. Public service broadcaster is not fulfilling its mission. If you look at the composition, if you look at the editorial policy, it's the same with the regulatory authority. Despite the fact both bodies are, according to the latest changes into the constitution, the constitutional bodies. And all this violence, non-ineffective response from the side of the government, of course, not only encourages further violence, but also it leads to the self-censorship and chilling effect. Access to public information has been significantly deteriorated. When the new prime minister stated that transparency is our key issue, there were some minor changes, but not systematic changes. The local media outlets, not only Tbilisi-based or the regional ones, are not invited to the public events, and the government is still boycotting, and it's several years already. So not participating in the talk shows organized by the by the independent media outlets, not giving the interviews, just like during the briefings. And it's boycotting. We have two ways of boycotting. It's not the representatives of the ruling party are not cooperating with the independent and critical media outlets, but also pro-government stations are not inviting the representatives of the political opposition, but also the representatives of independent media organizations or experts or critically minded persons. SLAPs. This term is relatively new in Georgian reality, but since 2021, unfortunately, the government used these mechanisms and is still using to suppress critical media outlets, to deprive from the resources, human, financial, legal resources, to concentrate not on main work, but rather on the court cases. And the government representatives, the colleagues and family members are filing the complaints against the critical and independent media outlets. Even so, the number has been not dramatically increased this year. It's around 40 reported trials. And if you look at the applicants, if you look at the time, generally it takes several years to finish first or second instances in cases of when ordinary citizen files a complaint, but in case of the family members or Georgian Dream representatives, the court trials goes very fast. This is one huge issue regarding the SLAPs, the fact that they file complaints. Another critical issue is the fact that the courts who are run by this so-called clan, and we have 3 judges who are under sanction by the US State Department. They are trying, so the legislation is not changing on freedom of expression and media freedom, which is indeed, by independent analysis, one of the best, not only in this region, but I would say on the European continent. They're trying to change the practice, and there are many indications with regard to the burden of proof, despite the fact there's a clear demand from the legislation that on the applicant lies a burden of proof, or in case of defamation against the journalist, the owner of the media station should be the respondent and not individual journalists, as the courts are changing this. We spoke about the Russian law, but at the same time, it's like we in the crossroad of the historical path of Euro-integration. Last year, Georgia got the candidate status, and one of the key recommendations, which was from 2 years ago and still remains, it's about independent media, independent of regulatory authorities, freedom of expression, and effective reaction from the side of the government to the violations. Illegal surveillance, it's a huge challenge for the journalists. And if a couple of years ago, pro-government media outlets were not just pro-government media outlets, so they were trying to manipulate the public opinion by differently explaining or providing the comments about the facts. Now it's like totally propaganda machine, and it's also inventing the cases, so Russian-style cases. They are organizing ambushes against civil society and media organizations, and they know this information of the gatherings when meeting just as colleagues, just as a friend, not having like professional discussion. They are organizing the ambush, and they provide the coverage as a, like there are some plots against authority, etc. So these are the key developments these days. Of course, these challenges are not exhaustive, and financial problematics is huge existential threat for the media outlets, among others. But at the end, I would say is that considering the time frame, etc., these days, thanks to the independent and brave journalists, and you can see some of them on this on the panel, we as a Georgian general public still have access to the pluralistic information, but this is provided at the cost of these journalists, resources, financial and health issues. And it's very critical situation. And once again, I would like to thank you, the Coalition and the All Institute for support, because international support and solidarity is very important, not only providing, publishing some report at the end of the year or midterm report, but this kind of alerts, among others, you are providing literally very soon. And I would like to thank you for that once again. So
thank you very much, Mamuka.
And I would be happy, along with my colleagues, to answer them.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mamuka. Just you mentioned our alerts, and I want to tell our audience, I think I have not mentioned this before, but we are obviously like monitoring press freedom violations in Georgia, and you can find the violations we've monitored and documented on Mapping Media Freedom website, and you can find the link for Mapping Media Freedom website also in the chat. And I also want to, turn to the audience soon. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat, in the webinar chat. We'll be very happy to. I'm sure that the panelists will be very happy to answer your questions. But while we are waiting for these questions, I have one last question. I'll ask Mamuka, but after Mamuka, please feel free to chime in, because this is something that I'm sure you'll have some input on. What do you think, Mamuka, should be the role of international community? You mentioned that, yeah, we are active, like international community is quite active and actively criticizing this foreign agent law. But in general, how do you see the role of international community when it comes to press freedom situation in Georgia?
Thank you for this question. Literally these days, the situation has been dramatically changed after the government reintroduced the Russian law. Because after last year's experience, when the general public actually protested against the Russian law, and the situation was relatively calm, considering the Georgian reality and got the candidate status, we spoke about the violence, about the illegal surveillance, etc. And plus, financial support was an important issue, and the flexibility of donor organizations to provide more flexibility to the media outlets. But today we have dramatically different situation. If the government managed to adopt this law, all the challenges we're speaking right now, or part of them we're speaking, they will be disappear, because the independent media outlets and non-governmental organizations will not exist. And because many leading organizations are publicly saying that they will not be registered. Even if you do not want to be registered as a like person under influence or foreign influence, you will be forced to do that. And plus, you will not be able. Just imagine a situation. Here are Lika or Mariam. How can they ensure when they're cooperating with the sources the protection? Even if the government will not do anything wrong, because when the source knows that I'm cooperating with media organization or civil society organizations, because they could be also watchdoggers, how can you ensure the protection? So this means that the government, you have to, I know you are very active, you publish the statements. This is an emergency, new reality. There is no exact formula, but I think we also should be the local stakeholders more active to explain to the general public the importance, the threat, and you also should be more active. This more activeness, I don't know what does it mean, but maybe even more harsh words and etc. Statements, despite the fact your statements were also very critical, but today's, I would say, like very, very emergency. And if the next week is a parliament adopts a law, and we will have, even it's quite very difficult situation with more difficult. And today I don't want to even speak what will happen, because today we have to concentrate that the government will not adopt, and the general public and media and civil society organization will defend the democracy and the European future. So that's why it's once again like more active, even so it's quite active. I don't know, I'm repeating my statements, but to be honest, it's very hard right now to find.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there something, Tamar, Mariam, Lika, you would like to add to this? Okay, thanks. We have a question here by Elena Rodina. Thank you for your presentation. My question is, recently Kyrgyzstan's parliament approved a similar foreign agent law. It seems to be a dangerous trend. Do you consider working together with independent media partners in Kyrgyzstan or other countries threatened with similar law to come up with joint solutions or actions? Thanks. Yes, like a day before, basically, the foreign agents law was signed, draft law was signed by the president in Kyrgyzstan, and just before it would be reintroduced in Georgia. So would you like to answer, who would like to answer this question, basically? Maybe Mamuka or Tamar or Mariam?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I will
please go ahead.
Actually, before right now we have very liberal legislation, and we should learn from Kyrgyzstan or Belarus how to operate in restrictive environment. I was joking yesterday because we were discussing project how to help journalists in exile in terms of professional development. Now we have to learn from them how to operate in restrictive environment, or it might be the case we will be in exile in future, because neither we are planning to register. We are flagging false content on Meta's platform that we have labeled that we are independent fact checkers. Having this label registration that we are serving foreign interests, it's unacceptable for us. We are ready to pay fines rather than register under this name. So I think collaboration, learning from experiences other countries are always useful. And after, as Mamuka mentioned, after adaptation, we will coordinate among us, and we will share experience with others as well. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, our media outlets are quite actively covering, given the resources, what's happening in Kyrgyzstan, and the Source Foundation is closer, and there is a restriction with regard to the TikTok. It's just like we watch what might happen in Georgian reality.
Thank you very much, Mamuka. It's also like maybe noteworthy that this legislation was even proposed in occupied breakaway region of Georgia and Abkhazia with the intention to harmonize Russian and Abkhazian legislation. But there has been also, Abkhazian civil society has also demonstrated resilience against the adoption of this bill so far. So there's really, the tendency is clear, and it seems that these foreign agent laws are becoming more and more contagious, especially in the region of Eastern Europe and Central Asia, because Kazakhstan has a similar legislation as well. And if there are no more questions, I'll ask one more question, and probably this will be my last question today, but please, I would like to ask the audience to please ask questions if you have any. Yeah, you mentioned a couple of times that it will be very difficult to work with people or, interview people when you have the label of an organization pursuing interests of foreign power, right? But I don't think there was a very widespread discussion on how would this impact media economically. Now, independent media, especially online independent media, are mostly donor funded, but to some extent, part of revenues come also from advertising. What do you think? How would it, impact on the financial situation of independent media outlets? Maybe Mariam or Lika want to chime in.
I think the advertising revenue is very small if anyone have it. It's not that substantial. I mean, no, I don't think they will survive on that. I think we have one example of ONG who is not completely reliable on donors. But then again, we were on the panel with them yesterday, and they were also saying that it's, even though they technically will not be obliged to register, this legislation is going to affect them in other ways. And I do think it will also affect the, the donor money for now. Like, we see a lot of support from the donors. But eventually, I mean, considering the relations this government is having with the donors at the moment, and how they are treating them, how they are portraying them, it may affect that as well. And it is dangerous that we may lose the funding together with this legislation, because donors may start pulling off their funding, or, I don't know, change priorities in a way. To be honest, I've seen some change of priorities from some of the local donors for whom the media was a priority a year ago or a few years ago, and they've been funding us for a few years, and they've told us that, yeah, this year no funds for media, and I think this could become a trend, unfortunately. So yeah, not just advertising, but donor money can also be threatened by this.
Thanks, Mariam. I think this is also what already started to happen in Kyrgyzstan, when some donor organizations already declared that they're leaving the market and are not going to fund civil society organizations or media organizations anymore. So
yes,
I think
similar in Azerbaijan. Like, in Azerbaijan, there is no civil society, there is no free media, or if it is, it's in exile. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
This could be our future, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is not a very positive note to end this conversation on. Is there any are there any comments you would like to make? Something else you would like to say?
Just one comment about unequal condition for media outlets financially, because Georgian media never was self-sufficient. Competing political interests are always shaping pluralism on our market. And you have in the middle donor-funded online platforms who are independent and reliable source of information. And the government has more resources to produce not only news, but entertainment content and you are not able to compare them. You should balance government concentrated media outlets with opposition funding, plus, which is also very limited, plus with donor funding. And this law makes this balance even worse. And each time government attacks independent media, they are publishing the logos of donor, accusing them in spreading false content. And it creates distrust. You have information disorder where everybody lies. You have no trustful sources to rely on. And it's very damaging and alarming.
Thanks for this remark, Tamar. And thank you again, everybody, very much for joining us today. Really important. I think it was a really important and stimulating discussion. And there were so many important issues raised that I think each might deserve a separate meeting and a separate discussion. And we at Media Freedom Rapid Response, we will, of course, keep monitoring the press freedom situation in Georgia and see how it will evolve in the future. Thanks again.